I get the feeling quite strongly that you don't believe Diddy. I don't think you believe a word of it.
Seems like he got a whole bunch of power on him, like absolute power.
I honestly did not care whether I lived or died. But now, I can't leave until this is straight. You know, I'm not I can't go until y'all really know what time it is.
I'm sorry, I'm just like really, I'm in this moment right now. This is crazy. Sorry.
All right, guys, let's dive right into this. Because what's being revealed right now could completely flip everything we thought we knew about Tupac and his story. For almost 30 years, we've been fed the same version over and over again. Las Vegas, a late-night drive-by. Tupac shot multiple times, rushed to the hospital, 6 long days fighting for his life, and then the tragic ending. Case closed, right? That's the narrative we've all heard. The one that got repeated in documentaries, news specials, and countless interviews. But now something has cracked through that wall of certainty. Imagine this. Tupac's own brother, Mopreme Shakur, sitting across from Piers Morgan, calm but sharp, his eyes steady on the camera, and dropping a statement that instantly changes the room. He's basically saying, we've been fed lies for decades.
What did he say that day when he called you?
You know, I have my guys with me, thug life guys, and we heard what he had to say. He basically said he ain't have nothing to do with my brother's murder.
And let's be clear, this isn't some random conspiracy theorist on YouTube. This isn't a fan chasing clout. This is family, someone who shared a home with Tupac, who grew up next to him, who knew the man better than most. And that's what makes his words hit so much harder. When Piers brings up Diddy, all the times Diddy swore up and down that he had nothing to do with Tupac's death, you can see Mopreme's reaction. He's not convinced. Not back then, not now. He has doubts, deep doubts, and he's not keeping them private anymore. He's putting them out there on national television. And this isn't just a gut feeling. He's been carrying this suspicion for years. Picture this. It's 2008, more than a decade after Tupac's murder. And out of nowhere, Diddy decides to call the Shakur family. He doesn't call casually, he doesn't leave it alone. He calls directly through radio host Big Boy, setting up a line of communication with Mopreme himself. Why? Because rumors were swirling everywhere. The streets were talking, whispers were getting louder, and Diddy, who claimed he was innocent, suddenly felt the need to explain himself. Now think about that for a second. Innocent men don't usually pick up the phone years later to reassure the victim's family that they didn't do it. They move on. They ignore the noise, but Diddy, he couldn't ignore it. He was rattled. He was bothered enough to set up a personal conversation, probably with his whole team around him, lawyers, advisors, maybe even PR people, trying to guide his every word. And yet Mopreme wasn't convinced. He listened, yes. He heard Diddy's denials, but deep down, he didn't buy it. His response was short, simple, and devastating. The truth always comes out. 4 words that must have echoed in Diddy's head long after he hung up the phone. And now here we are in 2025.
Boy, Puffy called me though. Puffy called me back in the day. He called me, he was like, I just want you to know I ain't have nothing to do with your brother's, you know, I know who you are, but we never met.
17 years later, Mopreme is sitting on a mainstream talk show, calmly but firmly questioning the very narrative we've accepted as fact. And look at Diddy's situation today. Federal racketeering charges hanging over his head, FBI raids tearing through his mansions, insiders and former allies beginning to break their silence. The empire he built is shaking, maybe even collapsing, piece by piece. Doesn't it feel like Mopreme's words from 2008 have come back with a vengeance? That call meant to control the damage now looks like a moment of desperation instead of strength. Ask yourself this. If your brother was murdered and you genuinely believed the official story, would you still be fighting for answers almost 3 decades later? Would you put yourself on national TV, risking backlash to question the entire case? Most people wouldn't. They'd seek closure. They'd try to move forward. But Mopreme hasn't stopped. He's still looking for the truth, and that persistence tells you something. To me, it suggests he knows more than he's willing to reveal outright. And notice how careful he is with his language. He isn't shouting conspiracy. He isn't throwing out wild theories. He's choosing his words like a man who understands the weight of what he's saying, planting doubt carefully, almost surgically. And the timing couldn't be more critical. With Diddy already drowning in legal troubles, with his empire under fire, and his reputation shredded by wave after wave of allegations, Mopreme stepping forward now doesn't feel like coincidence. It feels intentional. Maybe this isn't about fueling rumors. Maybe it's about confirming what's been whispered in the shadows for years. Because if Mopreme Shakur is right, then everything, and I mean everything, we thought we knew about Tupac's death and hip-hop history might be on the edge of being rewritten.
Part of Tupac's legend is that he'd been shot 5 times and survived before that fateful night here in Las Vegas in 1996. And because of that, Tupac's legacy has always been linked to Vegas.
People were starting to connect the dots, and Diddy knew he had to get ahead of the story. But here's the thing. Once you're making desperate phone calls to prove your innocence, you've already lost the upper hand. Mopreme's words, "the truth always comes out," are beginning to sound less like a warning and more like a prophecy. And now the cracks in the old narrative are starting to widen. For decades, Diddy has denied any involvement in Tupac's murder. But according to reports, investigators have been sitting on some explosive material all along. We're not talking about rumors from the streets. These are official interrogation tapes, recordings where Diddy's name comes up 47 times in connection with Tupac's shooting. 47 times. And these tapes, they feature Keefe D, the very man now facing charges tied to Tupac's death. He wasn't muttering in secret or passing notes in the dark. He sat in a federal office, across from agents, with recorders running, and allegedly laid out in detail how Diddy offered millions for both Tupac and Suge Knight's heads. One chilling line that keeps appearing in the files. Now think about this. Why would prosecutors hold on to these tapes for decades if they didn't see value in them? Why would Keefe D's statements be considered credible enough to charge him based on his own confessions if there wasn't substance there? Meanwhile, Diddy spent those same years building an empire, winning awards, giving speeches about peace and unity, denying any involvement at every turn. But the whole time, those tapes sat in evidence lockers, waiting like shadows that never went away. Fast forward to today. With Diddy facing racketeering charges and his empire under fire, those old tapes aren't just forgotten history anymore. They look like potential evidence that could tear apart his carefully built narrative. And here's the kicker. Prosecutors are often known to bring in older evidence to build broader cases. If they can show Diddy was allegedly running a criminal enterprise now, what's stopping them from connecting it to alleged plots from the 1990s? Keefe D's words about million-dollar bounties don't just sound like bar talk anymore. They could be the missing puzzle piece in the biggest unsolved case in music history. If those recordings ever make it to a courtroom, Diddy's denials might crumble faster than his business empire. And it doesn't stop there. When agents raided Diddy's mansions, they weren't even looking for Tupac evidence. They were after modern files, financial documents, racketeering trails. But sometimes the biggest discoveries happen by accident. Buried deep in his personal papers, investigators reportedly found documents with a single word stamped on them: Cuba. To most, that might sound like nothing. But in a case of this scale, nothing is really random, especially when that word ties directly into decades of speculation that Tupac may have escaped to Cuba after faking his death. Remember Tupac's aunt, Assata Shakur? She's been living in exile in Cuba since 1984. That fact has fueled conspiracy theories for years. And then there's Michael Nice, Tupac's former bodyguard. He claimed for years that he was part of an operation to smuggle Tupac out of Las Vegas, switching bodies at the hospital, arranging a private jet to Barbados, and then making the final move to Cuba under Castro's personal protection. Everyone called him crazy, dismissed him outright. But before he could release proof, he mysteriously vanished. Gone. Disappeared. He even insisted that Castro himself approved the plan, turning Tupac into a protected asset. Sounds unbelievable, right? Except now, with Cuban references allegedly showing up in Diddy's private files, it doesn't feel so far-fetched anymore. Theories that once sounded like fantasy suddenly feel a lot harder to dismiss. And if even a fraction of this connects, then maybe the whispers weren't just whispers after all. If Diddy truly kept documents linking him to anything Cuban, it raises a chilling question. Did he know Tupac was alive, or was he part of an effort to keep that secret buried? Why else would there be Cuban files in his possession, unless he was monitoring someone or something connected to that island. For years, residents in Havana have whispered about sightings. A tall man with Tupac's build moving through side streets, slipping into a cafe, vanishing before anyone could snap a clear photo. Grainy clips, shaky eyewitness accounts, rumors piling up about a legend hiding in plain sight. And remember, Tupac's myth has always been tied to survival. He'd already taken 5 bullets and lived before that final night in Vegas, September 1996. His legacy and that city are forever linked. But here's the eerie possibility. If Diddy's files contain communications with Cuban contacts, financial transactions, or surveillance-style notes about Tupac's movements, then we're not just talking about a cover-up. We're talking about an international conspiracy stretching across decades. Those Cuba files could be the smoking gun that suggests Diddy knew all along, and may have helped sustain the biggest deception in hip-hop history. Now imagine if prosecutors decided to open those files and reveal them to the public. The fallout could be catastrophic. It wouldn't just rewrite September 1996, it would shatter everything we thought we understood about that night, about Tupac, and about the industry that tried to move forward after him.
I'm sorry, I'm just like really, I'm in this moment right now. This is crazy. Sorry. People don't really know how much what it does to you when something that you love is taken from you and thrown away like it don't even matter, and then they move on with their lives and you're stuck. You're stuck during those years. You're still stuck 21 years later.
And as if that weren't enough, the official records surrounding Tupac's death only add fuel to the fire. Start with the coroner's report, supposed to be airtight, right? These are medical professionals documenting physical facts, but somehow Tupac's height and weight were recorded incorrectly. We're talking about basic details, the kind of measurements any examiner would get right without question. Errors happen, sure, but when the entire world is watching, when you're handling the most famous rapper alive at the time, how does something that simple get overlooked? You'd expect someone to double check, but the anomalies don't stop there. The cremator who reportedly handled Tupac's body, he retired immediately afterward. Not a year later, not months later. Immediately, he finished that job and walked away from the profession forever. Who does that? Who steps away from their career right after handling the most high-profile case of their life? And then there's the Vegas shooting itself. September 7th, 1996. Tyson had just fought. The Strip was packed. Thousands of people, cars clogging the streets, tourists flashing cameras everywhere. Yet somehow nobody saw the shooter. Nobody caught a clean glimpse of the gunman or even the vehicle. How does that make sense? Suge Knight, sitting right beside Tupac when it happened, has been hinting for years that the story doesn't line up. He doesn't come right out and say it, but his comments suggest the official account might be hiding more than it reveals. Back in 2014, Suge Knight didn't just hint. He said it straight to TMZ. Why you think nobody been arrested? 'Cause Tupac not gone. Think about that for a second. This isn't a random fan theory or a YouTube rabbit hole. This is Suge Knight, the man who was in the car that night, who lived through the chaos, who saw it unfold with his own eyes. If anyone knows how real that night was, it's him. So why would he throw out a line like that? Was he trolling? Or was he planting a truth in plain sight, knowing most people wouldn't dare to take it seriously? Now, maybe on its own that comment feels like noise, but stack it next to the other inconsistencies, and it becomes something else entirely. The coroner's report listed the wrong height and weight. How do you mess up basics like that when the world is waiting for answers? Witnesses who were vocal at first went silent, while others seemed to vanish altogether. The cremator who allegedly handled Tupac's body retired right after the job, walking away from his career on the most high-profile case he'd ever had. And the Vegas shooting itself? One of the busiest nights of the year. September 7th, after the Tyson fight. Thousands of people shoulder to shoulder, cameras flashing everywhere. Yet not one reliable eyewitness to the actual gunman or even the vehicle. How is that possible? All these pieces might look random individually, but together they start to form a disturbing pattern. And here's where things start connecting to Diddy's present-day situation. With everything unraveling around him, federal probes, racketeering charges, raids on his mansions, the same old conspiracy theories people used to laugh at suddenly feel different. Prosecutors aren't accusing him of petty crimes. They're framing Bad Boy Records as something far more sinister, a criminal enterprise disguised as a music label. Racketeering, coercion, exploitation, the kinds of words you'd expect in a mafia indictment, not in hip-hop press releases. The deeper you look, the more it feels like Bad Boy wasn't just a hit factory. It was a machine built to control, silence, and intimidate. And then you have the infamous freak-off parties, once the stuff of late-night jokes and gossip blogs. But according to prosecutors, these weren't just over-the-top celebrity get-togethers. They were allegedly staged marathons where people were pushed into humiliating situations, filmed without real choice, and later blackmailed. Imagine the psychology of that. One of the most powerful men in music holding compromising footage, ready to use it against anyone who crossed him. Speak out? You'd pay the price. Try to resist? You'd regret it. That's how control works, through fear, leverage, and silence. And if this is what was happening in the 2000s and 2010s, when the internet and media scrutiny were far stronger, ask yourself, what could he have gotten away with in the 1990s, when the spotlight was dimmer and the rules were looser? Former insiders describe a world where saying no to Diddy simply wasn't an option, where favors turned into debts, and debts could spiral into dangerous territory, where people who tried to resist suddenly changed their stories, withdrew their statements, or disappeared from view. Doesn't that sound familiar? Because it mirrors what happened around Tupac's case. Evidence that went missing, witnesses who went silent. A case that should have been solved with multiple leads but somehow stalled for decades. The same shadows of intimidation, silence, and missing pieces that prosecutors are now painting as part of Diddy's empire, in later years seem to echo back to that night in Las Vegas. So you have to wonder, if the same playbook was running, then as it allegedly was later, was Tupac's death just another part of a much bigger operation? Or was the confusion, the silence, and the missing evidence not incompetence at all, but the result of deliberate control? Either way, when you connect the dots, the parallels are hard to ignore. And now, with Diddy's empire crumbling in real time, all the old unanswered questions don't just come back, they demand new answers. And now, here we are, with federal agents combing through every inch of Diddy's empire using modern tools, high-tech surveillance, and resources that seem endless. And what are they finding? Missing witnesses in present-day cases. Victim number 3 has reportedly vanished, gone without a trace, unreachable even to her own attorney. Now pause for a second. If people can disappear in 2025 under the watch of federal protection, security systems, and non-stop media attention, then what does that say about 1996? Back then, when the industry was wilder, when Diddy's operation was younger and more desperate to dominate hip-hop at any cost, how easy would it have been for witnesses to go missing, for evidence to get buried, for the truth to be pushed aside? Think about it. Maybe the Vegas investigation wasn't sloppy at all. Maybe it was sabotaged. Sabotaged by people with money, with reach, with dangerous connections. Because if Tupac really did fake his death and escape to Cuba, and let's be clear, we're not saying he did, but if he did, that's not the kind of stunt you pull off with a few friends and a getaway car. That takes serious coordination, allies, financial backers, international contacts, the kind of infrastructure that spans multiple countries and involves people in high places. Picture the 1990s, Cuba under Fidel Castro, a leader openly defying America, allegedly harboring fugitives, proudly protecting those who oppose the U.S. government. And let's not forget, Tupac's own aunt, Assata Shakur, was already living in Cuban exile since 1984 after escaping a U.S. prison. So the precedent was there. If Cuba could protect her, why not Tupac? But here's the catch. Protection like that doesn't come free. The DGI, Cuba's intelligence agency, doesn't casually safeguard international celebrities. There'd have to be something in it for them. Propaganda value? Information exchange? Political leverage? Maybe even financial agreements. Now layer Diddy into this picture. If those so-called Cuban files really exist, and if they suggest he had knowledge, or worse, involvement, then we're not just talking about covering up a murder. We're looking at something way bigger, a multinational effort that required silence across hospitals, coroners, law enforcement, airport security, immigration systems, even government offices. Think about the sheer number of people who would have had to keep their mouths shut for nearly 30 years: nurses, doctors, police, airline staff, Cuban officials, intelligence operatives, and none of them talked? Not one. That kind of silence doesn't hold unless the stakes are life and death. And ask yourself, what kind of resources, what kind of influence keeps that level of silence intact? If Diddy was even partially aware of or connected to these networks, then he wasn't just protecting himself. He was helping maintain a narrative so powerful it reshaped music history. Because the story of Tupac's death isn't just about one man, it's about an entire generation, about the legacy of hip-hop, about who held the power and who was silenced. So what if the Cuba files aren't just evidence of survival? What if they're evidence of something bigger? An international conspiracy involving intelligence agencies, criminal organizations, and industry titans. Imagine prosecutors opening those files in court and pulling back the curtain on nearly 3 decades of secrecy. That wouldn't just be the biggest revelation in hip-hop. It would be one of the most shocking scandals in modern history, blurring the lines between entertainment, crime, and geopolitics. And if that moment comes, if those files see the light of day, the fallout won't just hit Diddy. It'll hit everyone connected, everyone who helped keep the silence, everyone who built their success on a story that might not be true. So I'll leave you with this. Do you honestly believe the official version, the neat little case closed story we've been told for almost 30 years? Or do you think there's more? Layers that were hidden, voices that were silenced, truths that were buried? Because if even a fraction of this is true, then we're not just talking about the biggest cover-up in hip-hop. We're talking about international espionage, a deception so large it redefined culture itself. And now, as federal agents pick apart Diddy's empire, we may finally find out what really happened. But until then, what do you think? Could Tupac's fate still be one of the biggest secrets in music history? Or have we been chasing shadows all along? Either way, this story isn't finished. It's only getting started.